What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the first person shooter tutorial series, we are going to be going over throwables in our game part 2. So in the first episode, we created a class with the components that we needed and a blueprint class so that we could assign these components values, such as assigning meshes and projectile movement components to them. In today's episode specifically, I want to go over the UI portion of the throwables. So I want to have something like 2 throwable slots. It could be configurable, it doesn't have to be 2, but one type of throwable and another type of throwable. And I want an image that represents them and an amount. So if I have 2 frag grenades, it's going to be an image of frag grenade, and it will say maybe ×2 next to it or something similar. We're going to do this one live instead of me having done it before the episode, so we can configure it as we go, but that is the desired effect. And again, we'll have 2 slots, so we can have throwable 1, throwable 2, so maybe we want to have frag grenades and throwing knives. We want to be able to hold both. Or what a lot of games do is they'll have lethals and tacticals. So they'll have something like a frag grenade and a stun grenade. But before we hop into this episode, if you want to get caught up in the rest of the series, you can see how we've done things like shooting our weapons, camera shake, interacting with objects in the world, taking damage, and a lot more. If you're interested in all that, in the whole series, I'll link you to the playlist for all the episodes of the first-person shooter tutorial series, right here in the top right corner. Alternatively, if you're just interested in the throwables, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to watch the rest of the series to follow along. But I do recommend you watch the previous episode, which is creating throwables in our game part 1, because if you watch that episode, then you will be familiar with the class that we're going to use today for our throwables, as well as some of our other code that is going to come in handy. And with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. Now this is a code and blueprint tutorial series, but we're going to be creating pretty much everything in the code today. We will be making the UI portion in the design view of a widget, so that will be in the blueprint. We can start in the code, and specifically we can go to our FPS tutorial character.h. In here, I want to have a variable or an object that is going to represent 2 things. It's going to represent the type of throwable that we have in our inventory and the quantity. I want to make a structure in our character called something like throwable slot or something similar. I want to do this above my class, so I will go above uClass, start making my structure. So uStruct, and we want to make it a blueprint type so we can see this type in the blueprints. We can make variables off of it and use it for things like casting and such. We're going to make an fstruct, and we'll call it throwable struct, or let's call it throwable slot. To follow along with the naming standard, we could use f throwable slot, just like structures are. And apologies on this, it is just struct, not fstruct. So struct, and then the f goes in the struct name to follow Unreal's coding standards and naming standards. You don't have to put the f in front, but this makes it pretty obvious that it's going to be a structure. So f throwable slot. And in here, just like any other class, we need to do our generated body. And from here, we can start defining what we want our variables to be and what we want in our struct. So just like a class, we come in here and we can start making these variables. First thing I need is our throwable type. So in the previous episode, we had base throwable.h, which had this e throwable type enum value, and this indicated what type of throwable we had. So I want that type, e throwable type, and we can call it just throwable type. And to do this, we can simply include the class, but we want to make sure that we put it above our generated.h include, because that should always be the bottom include in your header files. So I can come down here, type include or pound include, and then search for our base throwable.h. Doing that will give us access to this type, and then the other thing that we need in here is our counter. So int num throwables. So the type of throwable in the slot, the number of throwables in the slot. There we go. So now we have a structure, and we want to make a variable of this structure. So I'll scroll down to the best place to make this. It would probably be here. The throwable slot. First throwable slot, actually, for the character. And then we can make a second one, the second throwable slot for the character. And in here, we want to make an F throwable slot. And we can literally call it first throwable slot. If you want to do lethals and tacticals, like I was mentioning earlier, you could call it lethal throwable slot and tactical throwable slot. I don't think I'm going to limit it to that, but maybe later in the series we will have some logic about what we can and can't have. But F throwable slot, second throwable slot. And I do want to make these U properties as well. And I'll make them edit anywhere, blueprint, read, write, with a category equal to throwable slot. And I'll copy this and put it for the second one too. Now I don't have to set a default value for the structures or anything, so like this is perfectly fine. So what we're ultimately going to want is a way to pick up or equip items in this slot and fill out the data. But for today's episode, we can start by just filling out some default values for it. So if I go to my FPS tutorial character and go to my variables and where they're being set, find our first throwable slot dot, and we can set the throwable type equal to E throwable type frag grenade, and first throwable slot dot num throwables and set it equal to 2. And then we can do the same for second throwable slot. I'll set the throwable type equal to E throwable type throwing knife, and we'll set the second throwable slot dot num throwables equal to 3. And now we have default values in here that we can read from. So at this point we are good to load up the editor. Now that the editor is back open, we can go into where our widget is. So for me, that is in content, first person, blueprints, widgets, character HUD. Now in here I want to create my icons for my slots like I was telling you earlier, but to do that I actually am going to make another widget. So I'm going to go to add user interface widget blueprint, and we can just use the standard user widget here, and I'm going to call this throwable slot, and that should be good enough. And then if we go into throwable slot, we want to have an image and some text for our counter, or however we want to display it. So if we're in Unreal Engine 4, we will have a canvas panel by default. If we're in Unreal Engine 5, we won't. We can use a canvas panel if we want to. A canvas panel is perfectly fine for this, so whatever you have in UE4 when you start is fine, or go ahead and add one for UE5. I don't have to change anything on the canvas panel, but I do want to add an image to it. Again, this is going to be our throwable slot image. So we'll say throwable type image. And we'll make this probably 64 by 64 maybe. That might be a little too small. Let's try maybe 128. That's too big. Let's do 96 by 96. And that's probably pretty close. And then next to it, we want our text. So I can add text right here. For the text, I will call it throwable num text. And we can always position it manually for this since we do know how big the icon or image is going to be. So we can add the size of the throwable type image, which we set to 96. So I can put it at 100 if I want it like right next to it. Could give it some buffer as well if you want. This is probably fine, and I'm going to update the size of this as well to be 96 for the size Y. That way it matches the image. For the size X, I'm going to cut it down to simply 50. I don't think it needs to be very big because we're mainly going to be putting something like ×2 here. And for justification, I will put it in the center. I know just earlier I said size Y is 96 to match this, but actually let's just size this to the content. Because if it does move, that's perfectly fine. We may stop this from going above a certain value, so it's pretty unlikely that you're going to change the actual size of this. But even if you do, I think it's okay. And I think it looks pretty good how it is, so you don't need this whole huge canvas that we have here. You can manually modify this value by going to this fill screen button and typing custom, and then you can set the width and height. So we'll say for this, it can be a maximum of 150. Again, we can always change it if needed. And for the height, we could add buffer if we want, or we could set it to the straight 96, and that would be perfectly fine. So now if I change this to times 10, for example, see, it doesn't quite fit. So just to be on the safe side, if we want, we could make it like 160 would be good. And we can update our font if we want to. So I typically like to put on some outline settings here. So if I go to font, outline settings, outline size, and make it 2, I think it makes it pop and look better. And you could offset it if you want to move it down like in the middle of this. I actually think it looks pretty good at the top here, but if you wanted to, just change your position Y. And if you did 48 and changed your alignment on the Y to 0.5, you would get it exactly halfway. So however you want to set it up is up to you. But once you get your throwable slot in here, we can now go back to our character HUD, and we can add our throwable slot by searching in the palette, and just add this widget to our canvas panel. And now we have 2 of them, so I'm going to right click and rename the first one to first throwable slot, and right click and rename the second one to second throwable slot. And on both of them, I am going to size to content, so that as big as the widget is that we have here will be how much space it takes up on the character HUD. And I can move these into position manually. If you have a more organized HUD, feel free to do that. But for me, I'm just going to put it in line with these boxes, just on the opposite side. These are my ability boxes. So if I'm organizing this, I kind of just threw these together when I did this episode. But I can put the size of the ability 1 image to 130 and 115, and the position to, let's do 430 and 940. And then for ability 2 image, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to modify my size X to 130 and modify my size Y to 115 to stay consistent. I'll keep these 150 apart, so position X 430 means this should be 580, and the position Y should be 940. So now that these are lined up, I can just do the same on the opposite side. So the size that they are is fine, that doesn't have to match, but I would like to place it in the same spot. So one way to handle this is to go to the anchor on the first throwable slot and go to the bottom right. And then I can change the positions to 0, 0 for now. Change the alignment to 1.0 on the X and 1.0 on the Y. And then we can change the X and Y position to the negative values. So for the inner one, which is actually going to be our first slot since we are reversed, it is a position of 580 on the X. So if I take my position X and go negative 580, it's going to put it in the equivalent spot on this side. And then I can move it up to the same value, which this was down 940. Let's do negative 30, and that looks pretty good. And then I'll do the same thing for my second throwable slot. So I will set it to the bottom right anchor, change the alignments to 1.0, change the positions to 0. I'll take the Y position from this one, which was negative 30, and apply it here as well. And for the X position, I need to go to the leftmost box here, which is our ability 1 image. And I notice that it is 430 units. So if I go to my second throwable slot and just make the position X negative 430, that this will be in the right spot. The problem is, again, these aren't the same size as those images, which is fine. I can either manually move them, or I can stop sizing to content. For both of them, and set them to a manual size that I know. So for example, if I want to use the manual size method, I can change size X from 100 to the value that we set here, which was 160. And the size Y was 96. And we know our exact size now. So if we do this for the second throwable slot too, size X is 160, size Y is 96. I now have the exact size here, which is the same thing that size to content was doing, but I have the numbers here if that's easier. Now you can tell why 150 units apart is not going to match, because the size X is 160 units. Instead, we can say that we want them 200 apart, so if this one is at negative 580, we can maybe apply this one at negative 380. And that looks pretty good. This will be sufficient for now. So we can compile and save. Now I'm going to modify the throwable slot default to just say times 1 instead of times 10. because I think it makes more sense. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode on Throwables Part 2. In the next episode, we will go over actually getting that data from our selections in the code. That way the value that's on there actually represents the amount that you have. And the image isn't just a blank image, it is the actual icon that we want for our throwable. If you enjoyed this episode and it helped you with your throwables, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership, Patreon subscribers, and Discord supporters. You guys are fantastic. Thank you guys so much. If you ran into any problems following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There is a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.